you on right now.
Okay. So we're just missing Ryan from the board and Matt from the staff, I guess.
Correct.
Okay. Well, it's 6:32, so we'll just get started, and hopefully Matt can join quickly. So let's call the meeting to order. This is the Thursday, December 16, 2021 meeting of the Board of Directors of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority. We have a quorum present and we'll begin. Item number 1 is to approve our agenda. Can I have somebody move that into the record?
So moved, Rich.
Rich, seconded by Jesse.
Roger.
We'll just go down the list, yes or no, and also according to the, what is probably going to be our last meeting remotely, at least for a while, unless the legislature comes to the census and changes its mind. Please state where you are calling in, dialing in, zooming in from. So yes or no on the agenda. Mike?
Yes, and I'm in Savannah, Georgia.
I want to be Mike Alamay when I grow up. Rich?
75 degrees.
Rich Chag here, Washington County, Michigan, dialing in.
Raven?
Yes, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Roger?
Yes, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Jesse?
Yes, Ypsilanti, Michigan.
Kathleen?
Yes, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Susan?
Yes, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Kyra?
Yes, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
I'm also a yes from Ann Arbor, Michigan. So thank you, everybody. We'll move on to public comment. If you want to address this board this evening and you are calling in, please hit *9, I believe. If you are zooming in or attending by Zoom, please hit the raise hand icon. Please announce yourself. You have up to 3 minutes to address the board on anything you wish to talk about. So, Deborah, do we have anybody from the public who wants to address the board at this time?
We do. We have 2. The first will be Mr. Robert Pawlowski. You are unmuted now, sir.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everyone. Robert Pawlowski here, calling in from Southgate and Wayne County. 2 things I'd like to touch on during this part of the meeting. The millage. As you all know, when we get into next year, the millage we will be approaching the millage. And just like, and this is my opinion, I feel that this will be a critical millage going into 2022. SMART is going to have their millage coinciding with yours. It's very critical for SMART because they've got so much things going on and new changes and new proposals coming up, and the same thing here. But this is critical because we're throwing out a 2045 plan, and it's already been publicly announced all over this county. And you know, for our transit riders that do take buses, this is critical to them. And it also is an important issue. So for all my non-transit riders out there, vote yes to the 2022 millage for the ride. This is a critical millage. The ride has done so much over the course of this year to build their future and give them more opportunities to grow within this county and this city. And as I'm volunteering to do this, I am going to be promoting this millage with no campaign, no nothing, to give more public support to this system. And I'd like to get people's feedback. So for all my transit riders that are tuning in tonight that do not take transit themselves, if you see me during summer 2022, make sure to stop on by. I'd like to get your take on this millage to see what your thoughts are on it. I really hope that we can get a lot of votes this year, and I'll be rooting for you. So let's keep the ride going. The second thing I'd like to touch on is the fare structure. So if anyone tuned into the RTA board meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon, they just voted yes on the finalization of the regional master transit plan, which in that plan talks about the fare structure and the DART structure. I'd like to see the ride shift to a regional wide transit system when it comes to fares, because the separated fare structure does not work, especially with 2 different passes, with now D2A2 coming into the city. DART passes will change the way that we use this system, and it'll also change costs for riders in this area. So I know the new changes will be implemented in January, but I hope to see in the near future we shift to the DART system, hopefully in the coming months or the coming years. But as always, thank you for the time and opportunity to speak, and enjoy the rest of your meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person is Mr. Jim Mogensen. You are unmuted.
Yes, so as it relates to the millage, there is already confusion about what I think of as the continued operation millage and the long range plan millage numbers that are out there, and that there will need to be perhaps language that makes it clear which is which, if that makes sense. So a lot of people have interacted with the long range plan and the suggested millages as it relates for that long range plan. There are some, I believe that there are some complications with having the millage with the long range plan because of the kind of what I think of as cobbled together system. It may, I've spent time thinking through why some of that happened, but having, both the city of Ann Arbor, the city of Ypsilanti, and Ypsilanti Township have different issues relating to that. The city of Ann Arbor, where I'm from, already has a perpetual transit millage in addition to this millage. The city of Ypsilanti needs the millage in order to keep providing service. And the city of and Ypsilanti Township is concerned about tax increases, as was pointed out in the last board packet at the Watts technical committee meeting last month. So I think there's some real interesting issues. The other is the monitoring reforms, but frankly, these are predictable. The idea of policy governance, I believe, is to take the way of a lot of boards to kind of overmanage their nonprofits, for example, or other places that they're working with. And I had never experienced real serious overmanagement. I've also been to an Ann Arbor City Planning Commission meeting, which I think that's a different situation, but that the ATA didn't have that. And finally, I want to say at this time that I want to make sure when we have these restructurings and when we do the meeting structures, that there is a clear way for the public to get the information. So if we start getting rid of some of the monitoring reports, it's really important if citizens are trying to figure out what's going on, that they have ready access to some of the decisions and conversations that are happening with the board. Thank you very much, as always, for your time.
Thank you. Deborah, do we have anybody else?
No, that was it. And we're still working on getting Matt in the meeting. We were having some technical issues, so he should be on in just a moment.
Okay. Thank you. We'll move on then to item 1.3, general announcements. I see we have an item here, service adjustments, and I think Mr. Smith will take us through that. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wanted to let the board know that we continue to struggle with a labor shortage. And while we've done quite a bit with overtime and our drivers have done a fantastic job filling in as we have asked them to, we just can't sustain that indefinitely. So at this time, we are going to be suspending Route 68 again, and then reducing frequency on the 62, the 4, and the 24. With the 68, we were only showing about 5 rides a day. So the goal there was to impact the least number of people compared to taking anything else off the road. And with the other higher frequency routes that I mentioned, the goal there is to not leave anybody standing by the side of the road looking for the bus, but be able to just have it come slightly less often. And at the moment, I would love to give a prediction on when we'll be able to be back up to full service, but we have been continually hiring since March and have not been able to get ahead of our shortage of operators. So just wanted to inform the board of that and let you know that will go into effect December 23rd, which coincides with our winter reduction in service that the public would normally see, but we're going to keep those routes reduced for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Any questions for Brian about that? Kathleen?
I do have a question. How aggressively are we going to get this out to social media and media? Because the 23rd is next Thursday, and I'm thinking about people who have to travel over the holidays, especially like the 24 and all that, the impact that it's going to have on them. I'd like to give them as much of a head start as possible. And I really appreciate all the effort that you're making to try to maintain as many services as you can. I know it's difficult right now with the rise in COVID, and the new variant that's out there is making things impossible. So thank you.
Thank you. As far as how we'll be broadcasting it, we do anticipate a press release tomorrow, which will also be put out on all of our various social media channels. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram will all carry the message to let people know. And we wanted to start, obviously, by informing the board, but
Oh, of course.
it'll go out.
Will you also have signage at the transit centers then as well?
I believe so, yes.
Any other questions for Brian on that issue?
Another
Roger?
question, just, Brian's quite correct that there is a severe and long-lasting labor shortage. There just are not people out there looking for jobs.
Thank you. Anyone else? Jesse?
Thank you. Will there be is there any possibility to put announcements on the buses themselves? Either broadcast or posted?
I can certainly ask the announcing on the buses. Probably not, because it has to be put into a database that takes time to populate. But signage on the buses themselves, I believe that would be possible before the 23rd. And we'll obviously also let all the operators know so that they can inform their passengers ahead of time.
That's great. I think I'm thinking of something as similar to Kathleen, of people who don't really follow us on social media, which I imagine is probably the majority of our ridership, making sure that they're aware. And are there any planned adjustments to the recruiting process? I happened to just attend a seminar from the after ran. They were talking, obviously, every transportation agency is dealing with this, and they had a bunch of great presentations talking about what other transportation agencies are doing. Of course, they couldn't really talk about whether or not those things were successful, but I was wondering if there were, if we're rethinking how we recruit.
To be honest, we're trying kind of every avenue that all of the various professionals we have or can think of, including going to, for example, Troy and Don went to a veterans job fair to try to recruit just recently, which was a new thing, but something they both felt passionate about. So they went ahead and did on a Saturday on their own time. And I know Glenn has searched high and low for various places to put job postings to try to recruit new people, to try to make sure that we're meeting our diversity goals, all of those things. Unfortunately, we are simply not seeing the volume of interested applicants that we have had in the past. Typically, when we would post for MCO positions, we would be hiring for a class of 10 or maybe 12, and would get 200 plus applicants, along with probably 12 referrals from internal or existing employees, and be able to fill up a class with just internal referrals. And we had a posting up for 2 weeks with 15 applications in for an MCO. So unfortunately, we're not sure we could put it out anywhere that would reach an audience that we haven't already tried. But I'm certain if there were ideas that you'd like to share, we'd be happy to hear.
I apologize. I have two more questions real quick, and I won't belabor, but two things. One, with the Route 68 elimination, will those people affected be able to take FlexRide to accommodate? And then the second issue is I attended the same seminar that the same webinar that Jesse's talking about. And they said that one of the issues that transit agencies are having in terms of hiring is insurance. For some of them have age limitations in terms of MCO. So one agency said that their insurance limits the age they can't be younger than 21, while another agency said that their drivers could not be under the age of 25. Are we experiencing those same limitations with our insurance as well?
We have a requirement to have 5 years of driving experience, which puts folks pretty naturally at about 21. I'll be honest, I started at a university system, got my CDL at the age of 19, and I've had it ever since. But I believe our insurance is called out at 21, but I would imagine we might be able to try to reduce that to 18, which is the system that I started in before. And then to answer your first question about 68, the very bottom edge of 68 does match up with the bottom of the FlexRide area, but the remainder of 68's serviced by a multitude of other routes. So that will be where we're direct people to.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Let's move on then to section 2, our consent agenda. We've got the board meeting from last month, November 18th, and committee meeting summaries in the consent agenda. Can I have somebody move the consent into the record? Kathleen, seconded by Jesse. We'll just go yes or no. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
I'm also a yes, that's moved. Thank you. We'll move on then to section 3, policy monitoring and development. 3.1 is the treatment of the traveling public monitoring report in your packet. And it starts on page 14. And I think Mr. Carpenter, who's worked through his issues with their technology, has joined us, thankfully. So I'll turn it over to you, man.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for my tardiness. Apparently, the first 4 Zoom links were not the correct ones. The 5th one was the charm. Thank you very much. In your packet is the treatment of the traveling public monitoring report for policy 2.1. This covers an extended period because of some delays during the pandemic to monitoring. What you can see on page 15 is the overall summary of our feelings on compliance. You'll note there's a lot of green and one very obvious red pertaining to policy 213, which makes the entire policy only partially compliant. Speaking to that one, which is on page 19, this really hinges on the availability of printed material and the hard copy ride guide, the manual that we for many years printed with all our timetables, schedules, maps, tips and rules on writing, phone numbers, etc. A very handy book. We did stop publishing that during the pandemic, and we have not restarted, essentially out of concern that what Brian had to relay to you a moment ago could happen, is that we may not be able to sustain services in the public. And so we wanted to keep hard copy distribution to a minimum so that we could change the material very quickly if needed. The challenge was if we had thousands of ride guides out there in the community, that constitutes a promise that that's the service we're going to provide. And if we're not able to do that, we also can't simply retract all those ride guides and edit them. So we felt it was better to provide the information online and print it out if necessary when people walk up to the transit center and ask. That approach certainly has limitations. We had a great conversation at the service committee about those limitations, and you see some of the concerns about the limitations with that approach printed in the survey from board members. And we respect and acknowledge that, yes, those are difficult trade-offs. But I do want to be clear, it is our intent to begin publishing the ride guide again as soon as we can. Brian and I think the entire executive team sort of recognize there's always going to be people in our community for whom the internet is not a viable option. And I personally prefer the hard copy material. Maybe I'm old fashioned, I don't know. But so we are going to be resuming that as soon as we feel that it's a promise we can meet. There were some other, I think, notable comments from the committee on this monitoring report contained in the service committee notes, but I will let those board members speak for themselves if they'd like. And then finally, there is a note on page 28 pertaining to the wording of a policy. That's something for your consideration. With that, Mr. Chair, the committee, I believe, voted to recommend that this policy be accepted as a level B of compliance, and I turn it over to you for your discussion and decision.
Thank you. Discussion on these items, Mike.
Yep. Matt, how much in the way of comments did you receive from the riding public about the lack of published schedules? How much of a problem was it that you heard about?
I think, and I'll ask Brian to weigh in with his perspective in terms of being closer to the customer service staff, but I know it was a keenly felt disruption and absence at the beginning, and we continue to hear, I'd say, isolated trickles of disappointment that we haven't put one out yet. We completely agree with those, but I also am not aware of some big flood of discontent. Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I would actually describe it exactly as you did, that it was a continual grip of, we would like to have written materials. Every time we did get a call like that, we would send out either in the mail or hand out across the desk our packet of what we had available. But we did hear, I did not have a wave at all of complaints about the ride guide, but regular comments about it.
And Brian, I'm hearing a lot of distortion in your microphone. I don't know if anyone else is, but maybe if you're using a mic, unplug it, plug it back in or something like that.
Matt or Brian, are there any legal requirements or regulatory requirements to have it in print?
I'm not sure offhand. Brian may know. But we do have it available in print. Hard copies are available. Admittedly, you have to go to the Blake Transit Center or call us. And like Brian was saying, we'll send it to you, which is not obviously the ideal, but would probably satisfy that legal requirement. Brian, are you aware, and I'll look at Dina too, I'm not aware of a legal requirement for hard copies specifically.
We're required to have it in an accessible format. So written meets that obligation. I don't know that it's spelled out specifically how, but I can't imagine somebody not having a written schedule of some kind. I suppose it's a possibility at some point, but I anticipate us having a written or a physical schedule available.
Thank you.
For my career.
I might add that typically anytime you do something and then you take something away is when you'd be most likely to be concerned about that. So the fact that we have had written materials, and it's probably a good idea to continue that in some form, but it is not specific as far as I know in terms of where you have to have it or you know, how exactly you have to have it, but it does have to be accessible. And if we have something and then we take it away, it would be evaluated.
And Brian, your microphone is much improved.
Yeah. Any other discussion or questions, Raymond?
Yeah, I wanted to say a few things about, and this could be a good springboard for just the policy governance discussion that we'll have a little bit later. And Matt and I had a little bit of a sidebar on this topic, so I thought I'd bring it before the full board as well. One of my frustrations with these reports is for things that are not compliant, we don't get a good deal of information about how those will be remedied or when they will be remedied. And so as Matt explained to me under policy governance, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not appropriate for the CEO to tell the board how to remedy it, but it is appropriate for the CEO to indicate when it will be remedied. But in this report, if you look on page 19 on what we're talking about now, what is not compliant, there is no timeline for any of the things that are not in compliance. So, you know, several board members in the comments talked about the printed materials. We're still not hearing a timeline for when the printed materials and the ride guide will be available. I think I appreciate staff's explanation that things are still in flux, but I don't think that a ride guide is tantamount to a promissory note. We deviate routes and schedules all the time. And I'm sure that can be easily remedied with a legal disclaimer at the beginning of the guide that says subject to change. And then the part that I'm particularly interested in is the real-time information, the data feed for third-party apps. You know, there's not even an attempt to address that. The report says, you know, at this time, we cannot provide an anticipated date for compliance with certainty. So the frustration that leaves me with is we acknowledge that we're not being compliant, and then that's it. And we're supposed to accept the report and forget about it for a year. And I don't I don't know what we're supposed to do with this, right? I mean, we acknowledge that we're deficient. We don't have a game plan to address it, and we're just going to accept it. And this has played out a couple times, and if this is the model for policy governance, this is the tool we have to ensure that, you know, we're meeting compliance with the policies that have been set. And you know, and this is not, you know, staff in the ride does an excellent job. You know, A+ on, you know, 99% of everything that we do. But there are some things where there's some room for improvement. And I'm always looking for what the game plan is for that room for how we're going to address and remediate those issues. And And I always find wanting in those areas. So, so anyway, it's directed at this report, but then can also be a springboard into our discussion later on in the agenda as well.
Actually, this is Rich. So Dean and I went to a policy governance conference, oh my gosh, like a month or two ago. And this exact topic came up because we were wondering what's the best approach for, because in the end, the bigger picture is like, how do we track when, like you said, when things are deficient? Because we don't really get any updates or anyone saying like, oh, well, remember we had this deficiency, like what is the status now? And what they said is actually we on the board have to have someone that actually does that, that really, because we asked like, is staff that should do that or us? And they said actually usually it's the chair or the secretary that keeps a tally of that, and then they can actually interact with staff, in this case, Matt, to get updates on those particular monitoring reports. So it's just something for us to talk about.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I have no problem. I mean, if we think we want to go in this direction, I have no problem with the chair or the governance committee taking the responsibility to follow up at, you know, we can make this a governance committee item or a chair CEO item to do a tracking of those things and a spreadsheet of them so that we do show progress. I mean, we've done it in the past when things were severely deficient. We said when it came to treatment of staff, you know, come back to us within 3 months and present a plan. But no, we typically haven't done this because, and to be fair, it's usually we're not capable of doing this, or it's so confusing that it's out of bounds. But yeah, sometimes there are ones where we could say we're not in compliant. We have the ability to be compliant, and we just haven't done it for whatever reason. It just hasn't happened. I mean, if the rest of the board thinks that this is an important enough item that we should add it to our monitoring and our schedule, then yeah, I mean, I think it should be, but it shouldn't be just the chair. I mean, the staff should be accountable to the whole board. Maybe it can be something the chair reports out on or the chief governance officer reports out on. But it's really for the staff to continue to be monitored on the non-compliant items. And there's a kind of a side system where the governance committee or the chair follows up. I have no problem with that. And if people want to look into that, we can do that. Kathleen?
So as I think about this, Raymond, thank you so much for bringing this. It's been an issue in the back of my head, and you verbalized it so well. For me, rather than placing the onus on the chairman or the governance committee, if we, like when we saw that the treatment of staff and we wanted a report within 3 months, could it just be a housekeeping thing where right then we put on the agenda 3 months later, expectation of said report. And then that way, when the agenda pops up, we know that we need to expect a report. I don't know if that would be helpful, but then I don't know. But thank you so much for Raymond for raising this issue.
Jesse?
Yeah, I think that was my thought as well, that I think as a really simple, straightforward practice we can enact really right away is when something comes to us and we deem it to be not in compliance, we set a deadline even for a sub policy. And if we decide that it's like it doesn't need to be reviewed until the following year when the next report comes in, then okay, but we've made that decision. But I agree that when something is not in compliance, I think it would make sense for us to talk about when we should expect compliance and work that out as part of our discussion.
Well, what I'll suggest though is, yeah, we could do that. I mean, I have a little bit, I have a couple of reservations about that. But I think I think we're all in agreement that follow-up action needs to occur. It needs to occur at the board level. And we'll have to think about, well, I'll have to think about the timing of it and what form that takes place, but we can have some more discussion. I think probably the governance committee is probably the place to have some discussion about it. And I will put it on our agenda for governance committee, which we are meeting on Monday to discuss this. So we will take that up at the governance committee meeting on Monday to talk about what form that's going to take. So we already know Jesse's opinion, so you don't have to come to the governance committee, Jesse. But yeah, but thank you. We'll take this up. Raymond?
And then I have another suggestion for this monitoring report. I noticed a lot of the metrics that are identified are pegged to the triennial review. That triennial review is fairly outdated. And so it feels like there should be some better monitoring mechanisms that don't come once every 3, or we're going on probably 4 years since we did our last triennial review, that can show better progress towards meeting those goals, right? I mean, I think, Matt has that liberty to make that interpretation, but I guess my suggestion would be, if we're only monitoring, if we're pegging our monitoring report to something that only occurs every 3 years, why are we producing this report every year if it just falls back to that? Now, that doesn't apply to every single aspect of this monitoring report, but there are several things that do. So I would either suggest we not monitor those annually and peg it to the triennial review and just be done with that when that report comes out, or come up with different defining metrics that we can measure progress against.
You have suggestions for what those would be? I mean, here's my issue. If we cycle it every 3 years, it's going to be outdated no matter what. And if in this case 4 years. However, if we I guess the onus would be on the CEO to come up with the metrics to tell us how he interprets that and what to come up with. If we just tell him we want more updated metrics, we can certainly do that. And it'll be up to us to decide if those are sufficient. But I don't know. I think this is an open point for discussion. I don't want to cycle this every 3 years, because I don't want to wait until every 3 years to find out, hey, we're in compliance, and then it takes another 3 years for us to find out if we're in compliance again. I mean, I think this should be an annual item for review for all of us. So I guess I'd like to hear some discussion, maybe starting with you, Raymond, or other people, about what you prefer. I guess I would prefer to keep it annual and update the metrics to the extent that we can.
Yeah, that would be my preference, right? I mean, because I agree, monitoring something every 3+ years is not necessarily overly informative if we're trying to track progress on a regular basis. So, and again, not all of the report references the triennial review, but a number of those do, and I feel like there could be better things out there that we could be tracking. But I mean, the real interpretation is the CEO's interpretation is the CEO's interpretation. So if you're asking me what those should be, that would feel like stepping outside of the bounds of what the board should be doing.
No, I'm not asking what it should be. Just do we prefer the updated something different route, or tie it to the triennial review? I mean, the issue otherwise would be what is the shelf life of the triennial review, right? I mean, is it good for 1 year? Is it good for 2 years? Certainly 3 years is probably, it's off the shelf. But if we say, hey, we're compliant within the first year, anyway, CEO, he's a smart guy. He can figure it out. But I mean, we'll let him chew on that. Matt?
Thank you, and I again thank Raymond for raising some of these things. Good points. The board certainly can determine as a body that the evidence is not compelling, I think is what the point Raymond is making, is that every 3 years isn't good enough. You don't have to figure out the metrics. You just tell me, every 3 years isn't enough. Go back, figure something else out. That's what I have to do. The triennial was a starting point because it was something, essentially an outside impartial audit that I can't influence. So that was kind of our starting point, but it has been a while. And perhaps we need stuff more frequently than that, or perhaps you need to see information more frequently than that to be satisfied with an annual monitoring report, which is completely your right as a board.
Kathleen?
So I wasn't sure if I was going to raise this or not, but since Raymond raised his question, I have a similar concern with regards to using the ADA and the Title VI monitoring. For me, and I've attended quite a few different webinars and transportation seminars, and to me, they're reactive. In other words, you get told later on, this has been, this, you're out of bounds, or, this came, Title VI says you violated this or whatever. And I think we can all agree that the ADA and the Title VI are the low end of the bar. They're there, thank goodness. I'm wondering if there's a way, and instead of just involving those metrics, we also can say what we're doing right. The alternate formats that we supply in different languages, say for Title VI, like Chinese or Mandarin and Spanish. Or what are we doing for our persons who are deaf? Do we supply TTY so that they can contact us? Those to me would be metrics that I could, or things that I could see that we're doing in a positive fashion. Because of the concern that I had when I was reading the part, specifically with regard to the ADA, our metrics all revolve around accessibility in terms of physical accessibility. I see wheelchair accessibility, we have ramps, we have this, but accessibility is greater than just the wheelchair user. It's persons who are blind, persons who are deaf, persons who have mental health capabilities that developmental delays and things like that may prevent them, where they may need training to ride a bus or things like that. And to me, those would be acceptable metrics or acceptable ways of saying this is how we are navigating or how we are providing services to our customers. But yeah, just to solely rely on the ADA and Title VI as the be all end all, just it feels the same way as what Raymond was saying about triannual. And again, I also echo Raymond that I know that the staff are doing an amazing job. It's just trying to figure out a way to really make sure, because the hard part I have with policy governance is sometimes I feel, I know we're not supposed to get in the weeds. We're supposed to get these reports, and the staff and the CEO under the staff, or the CEO directs the staff and they do everything. But sometimes I'm left feeling a little disconnected from that, or from information and from how to help our ridership. So thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on the monitoring report? Discussion about the comments, etc. Jesse?
Yeah, I'll start off briefly saying I think Raymond makes an interesting point, and it may to the point. Well, I'll be interested to see whether there is a motion to suggest that the evidence is not compelling enough to support the CEO's proposal of compliance. But moving on to my own personal point, I've said this in the previous times this report has come up, and I'm going to say it again, that I maintain that our individual bus stops constitute AAATA facilities. We maintain them. We are legally responsible for them, and they are not all even ADA compliant. And I've had some conversations with Matt about this, and he pointed me to the recording of a meeting that took place before I joined the board, which was interesting, and I wanted to have a conversation about that meeting as well. But that the basic point is that they are our facilities. They come out of our capital budget, and he has left them out of his interpretation of his definition of a facility. And Matt, I'm not going to rehash the conversation that you and I had. I'd rather let you speak for yourself to that point.
Thank you. I believe Jesse's referring to policy 211, which can be found on page 17 of your packet. And as it's read, it says the CEO shall not provide facilities, vehicles, or services that are not reasonably accessible to potential riders, regardless of mobility limitations. This is one where I do cite the ADA as the definition of what is accessible. And I do define facilities in fairly narrow terms, particularly in this policy, as buildings, the passenger terminals. When Jesse raised this in the service committee, my first reaction is I think he's disagreeing with my interpretation, which is fine, and that I'm saying a facility is just a building. He's making a point that he thinks that includes bus stops. I thought about it overnight and called him back a day or two later and told him that I think he is correct and that I was in error. I had a reason for not including them here, and it has to do with not, if it's a facility, technically I have to come back and get your approval for it. And with about 1,200 bus stops, and we could be doing dozens of them a year, I don't think you want me bringing every concrete job to you for your consideration. But I think there's probably a way to wiggle through this. What Jesse and I discussed is whether or not this resolution is best addressed through me changing my interpretation, which means I could change it back someday, or some other CEO could change it back, or if this rises to a level where the board wishes to clarify its expectation in its written policy. So if you were to edit the policy to provide, say, shall not provide facilities, bus stops, vehicles, etc., then that would be a permanent change dictated by you to me and the staff. Your expectations would be clear. I would have to develop an interpretation that directly addressed bus stops. And I couldn't change that later. So Jesse and I had a good conversation about it. We already have a de facto administrative policy working towards this same goal of making all bus stops wheelchair accessible. So from a practical effect and a budgetary effect, it's just sort of which path do we want to use to get to the same result. It's kind of something for the board to ponder in terms of how you wish to give direction to the organization.
Jesse, any follow-up on that?
No, I mean, I do have like thoughts about like whether when he brought up the idea of like, do we need a policy that specifically addresses bus stops? To me, that felt kind of specific, kind of getting to the issues of like why we're called the Ann Arbor Transportation Authority and not the Transit Authority, is that we don't limit ourselves to specific modes. But that's kind of getting, I don't think this is the time to have that specific of a discussion. I guess I just wanted Matt to kind of put out the other side of the conversation that we were having. But I think if in terms of assessing the policy as it currently stands, I don't find his interpretation to be complete because of this exclusion. And I think at this point, Matt kind of feels the same way. In terms of like action on it, I think I would look to the rest of the board to see, do they agree? Do you all agree that this is an issue of definitions, or is it an issue of interpretations?
Raymond, go ahead.
Yeah, and I appreciate Jesse framing the issue that way. And
I don't know if I could probably land on a determination. What's going through my mind right now, and I want to throw this out there, is what if we kick this back to Matt and staff and give them like 2 more months to take the input that they've heard tonight, update the report, because I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I mean, I think a lot of the report is good. I think a lot of it's legitimate, but, you know, give Matt another bite at the apple in terms of, you know, the interpretations, in terms of the timelines for compliance, in terms of, you know, are there other metrics that we can look at, whether it be in this report or just allude to it for the next report. I think that would go a long way in satisfying where I'm at. You know, the other thing that I mentioned to Matt is, you know, these things kind of fade into the ether after we look at them one time, right? I do not go, maybe you all are more diligent than I am, but I did not look at last year's report to see which items weren't in compliance, to see if we're actually tracking in a positive direction or not. And without us kind of comparing, you know, year-over-year progress, you know, if we accept something as not compliant, we may come a year from now and the same thing might not be compliant. Unless someone is tracking that, how would we know? So to me, the remedy would be, you know, let staff take the input that they've heard tonight, update this report accordingly, and then we can, you know, contemplate it further and then make a determination. It's kind of what I'm thinking might be the best course of action.
Well, I mean, where we're bleeding over right now is probably straight into the next item agenda, which is monitoring reforms, right, altogether. And I mean, so there's a couple of issues. Some of them are tactical and some of them are conceptual in my mind, which is, you know, we've had discussions, and I think, you know, we had this last month and we've had it previous months. But, you know, Mike brought up, hey, how can we, you know, we spend a lot of time on this, people don't read them, they don't respond, etc. So how can we lessen the amount of time we spend putting these, how can, you know, we take more burden off the staff to produce these reports and spend less time on the reports? And what I think, this is not a criticism in any way of Jesse or Raymond and their points, which are very valid, but that will increase the amount of time we spend on monitoring. Right. So we can't have it both ways. We've got to either commit ourselves to the monitoring, or we've got to find a more efficient way to do it. But if we're gonna do things like ask Matt to say, hey, show us a side-by-side year-over-year comparison about how we've done versus the year past, or something like that. I'm not saying we're asking him to do that, but if we're gonna say, you know, hey, we didn't, you know, take another bite at the apple, come back in a couple of months, which is just going to add, everything I've heard so far is going to add to the monitoring function of the board. We've talked in the past about lessening that burden on both the staff and the board, spending less time on it. So it's a good discussion to have, because, you know, this bleeds into the whole monitoring reforms issue. And it's really a philosophical as well as a governance broad issue altogether, and it's not trivial, because it's one of the main tasks that the board has under policy governance, which is you know, monitoring and policy monitoring and checking to see if we're compliant, not just with the ends, but with all the other things as well. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem. I just want to make sure that we, you know, before we say, yeah, it's a good idea, that we recycle this and have Matt take another shot at it and come back. There's issues both with this particular report that we would have to further define for Matt in terms of timeline, and then conceptually, you know, that everything has to be fixed, what can't be fixed, what's a matter of just, you know, bad language in the policy, et cetera, and that's what made it incompliant, non-compliant, versus, you know, hey, we just didn't do that this year, or it got overlooked, and that's an easy fix, like a RIDE guide publication. So there's tactical things here, there's more strategic, conceptual things, and I think it's a philosophical discussion as well about, you know, how much time and effort do we want to put into monitoring? So I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack with this, and certainly this wasn't on our agenda for this evening, but I'm happy to have the discussion because I think it's very important about it. And this is probably a good springboard for it because this isn't a policy where we completely drop the ball on everything. Like Raymond said, most of it is very good and it's compliant. But just starting with one of these small issues is probably the way to go. But we're kind of bleeding over into Mike's, I think, what Mike's going to suggest in terms of monitoring reforms. And I just wanted to, I think, point out my thoughts as we transition over to that. Any other discussion? But I would like, I guess, before we talk more about it, to turn it over to Mike, and then maybe we can make a decision. Well, before we do that, I guess we should vote on this monitoring report and whether or not we are going to accept it and at what level. So let's stick with this monitoring report before I go to Mike. Any other discussion about the report itself? Let's put it to a vote. I think the recommendation is for level B in compliance, except for the items noted. I won't ask somebody to put into record. I would like a motion for one of the levels: A, in compliance; B, except for the items noted; C, reasonable progress towards; D, not in compliance or not making reasonable progress; or E, cannot be determined. Can I have a motion? Jesse?
I'd like to make a motion for B, items noted, with items noted being 213 and also 211.
Okay. Do I have support for that?
Support.
All right. We'll go through and vote then. Yes or no at level B. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Raymond?
No.
Can I have a
Roger?
point of order? I feel like we should have had some discussion on the motion before taking it to a vote. Like, I don't feel like we had hashed that out.
Well, we had motion and support, but you want to have more discussion about it? Go ahead.
Well, I thought that the order usually went motion, second, discussion on the motion, then a vote. And we skipped the discussion on the motion.
Okay, we can go back. You want to have discussion on your own motion? Go ahead. It's your motion. If you want to discuss it, go ahead.
I do. I guess what I'm particularly interested in is if, I guess to be quite blunt, whether it sounds like Raymond might want to put might want to tack some other things on there in addition to 211. And I want to make sure they had a chance to speak his piece.
Well, again, I didn't put it in the form of a motion, but my suggestion was to postpone this for 2 months and allow staff to come back with an updated version that addresses our concerns. If we accept the report in any form or fashion, it gets archived, and then we won't talk about it again for a year. So what I'm trying to do is force the issue of, we've heard concerns from 3 or 4 board members that I think are legitimate enough that they should be addressed in the report. So even if we accept it as compliant, except as noted B, that's it, it's done. We won't talk about it for another year unless one of us brings it up specifically. So I'm trying to force that issue to say, let's talk about it in 2 months or 3 months or whatever the case may be. So that's why I don't want to support the acceptance of it. It's not, again, I'm just trying to, get some continuity. And again, it does springboard into our next discussion, but the action in front of us is this report. So if I have to make a decision on it right now, I would prefer to not accept it and wait. But, if I'm the dissenting vote, that's fine.
Well, no, I guess that's just it. Like, I mean, so if you brought up, sorry.
We're in the middle of a vote. I mean, we're in the middle of a vote for it. Okay, the motion was made by you, it was supported, and I mean, Raymond had every opportunity to make a motion to delay this as opposed to accepting it before we did that, right? So, I mean, he could have said that, but I asked somebody to put a motion on the floor. You put a motion on there for B, so I guess if we're going by Robert's Rules of Order, we have to complete the vote.
I guess when I said that I thought we needed to have discussion on the motion first, I thought that you had agreed, okay, to have that discussion. And so I thought that's the part that we were in. And so I kind of thought that we had jumped the gun with holding the vote and that the vote had not in fact started. That I was not meaning to have a conversation in the middle of a vote. I thought we were saying, I was meaning to say, we shouldn't be voting yet. Let's have the discussion on the motion.
Tell you what, do you want to withdraw your motion at this point to have a further discussion?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll withdraw the motion. So we still have it on the floor. Is there any more discussion or any other motions that want to be made before we vote on this report? Susan?
Yeah, just a question for Raymond. How would it feel if we made an amendment to what had been just discussed and said we would accept the report in those items that were acceptable? However, in 2 months' time, we would like staff to bring forward recommended steps or metrics for those items that were not acceptable, so that it allows for that return of these very specific, for these items. So I'm asking if there's a way to accept 90% of it, but have some return discussion for those items that are not yet completed. I'm with you on that. I'd prefer to sort of see this through rather than wait a year and do this again, because it is very likely there's so much on everybody's table. We really won't be thinking about this after tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be a good compromise. But even, and again, I feel like I'm playing this role a lot lately. I mean, by even Matt's admission, he has an interpretation after speaking with Jesse that even he finds inadequate. But we have a report that we're about to accept that includes that incorrect interpretation related to bus stop facilities. So I just, it seems a little bizarre to me to just like accept it and file it. But if that's what the board wants to do, that's fine. But so there's no motion on the floor, Chairman Muller, is that correct?
I mean, there's no motion on the floor, but I think Susan's point, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think that's why we have level B, which is in compliance except for items noted, and then we can instruct the staff to come back and give us a timeline about the items noted. I mean, I think that's the issue, and there's no reason to, I mean, you even said it yourself, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? We can accept 90% of this, ask for further action down the road, and I have no problem putting that rider, if you will, onto the motion if somebody wants to make that. I mean, it's either you or Jesse or whoever wants to can do that. I mean, that's a way forward. We can be a little flexible with that. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be, we just don't think about it again. But yeah, if we didn't do anything, we have a lot of other things to worry about between now and next year. This probably won't be, publishing ride guides might not be at the top of the list, or the definition of facilities as a bus stop might not be at the top of our list. It might get lost. But if we ask for further concrete here and put it on a further agenda, we'll hold ourselves and the staff accountable for it. So do you want to do that motion, or does anybody want to do that motion with that rider attached to it that they come back in 2 months? Roger.
I'll try to phrase a motion here that we accept B in compliance except for items noted, and we add, besides the 2.1.3 and 2.1.3.1, we also add 2.1.1 to the items noted, and request the CEO come back with a further report in the next 2 months. That satisfy the.
Is there support for Roger's motion?
I'll support that.
Any further discussion then? Jesse?
Just to make sure I have it right, we're talking the items noted being 211, 213, just 211 and 213.
And 2131.
2131. Okay. Okay. So,
Those three items.
all right. There are other policies that mention the triennial review, and I guess if we're not considering the triennial review to be sufficient evidence, then I would add 212 and 215 as well.
Do you accept that as a friendly amendment, or you reject that, Roger?
I guess I would reject that.
Okay.
In that, I don't know if there's any other objective way to address that.
All right, so we have a motion, we have support, we have a suggestion for adding 2 more, which Jesse mentioned. Any other discussion on Jesse's amendment to the motion, to Roger's motion? And we need a vote first on the amendment to the motion. Okay, so Jesse's suggested amendment to Roger's motion, which was not accepted as a friendly amendment, we have to vote on that. Yes or no on Jesse's amendment to the motion? Mike?
No.
Rich?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
No.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Kyra?
No.
And I'm also a no. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, that was Mike, Roger, Kyra, and me. And Rich, Raymond, Jesse, Kathleen, and Susan. So we have 5 yeses, 4 no's, so that passes. So with the amendment to Roger's motion, which is on the floor, any more discussion on that as amended? We'll have a vote on it.
Well, yeah, just a clarification. I think what I heard was the triannual review is a tool, but may not be sufficient as the only tool. So I just want to make sure I'm hearing that correctly, that we're all saying the same thing. Because it happens so seldom, it doesn't give us enough information throughout the 3-year period to keep our constituents informed. But it does have validity and it does have value as a tool. So I want to make sure I'm hearing that correctly, but not the only tool. Is that shared? Is that what I'm hearing? Am I hearing that
I
correctly?
think that would be up for the people who criticized it to respond to.
Yeah, so I guess that's directed at me. So, Federal Transit Administration comes in and does a triennial review. I suspect it was probably conducted in 2017, but wasn't issued until 2018. Now, I can't confirm that. Maybe staff can. I know it normally takes 6 months or more for them to actually issue the report. So we're looking at a report that is at least 3 years old. So if we are monitoring year-over-year metrics, but we're pegging that year-over-year metric to a report that only comes out once every 3 years, or in this instance, 4 years, because we were actually supposed to be evaluated last year and it got postponed, as I understand it. It just doesn't feel relevant, right? So again, my point was we either need to take that out and not, because it's meaningless. Because quite frankly, we get the triennial review, right? That's the other thing is the board, I believe it's an FTA requirement that your board has to accept the triennial review. So we already get that when it's done. So we know what we're compliant in, what we're not compliant in as a result of that report. So then to peg these reports back to it is quite frankly redundant. And not only is it redundant, but it actually doesn't inform things beyond what already comes out of the triennial review. So what I was encouraging is let's just find better metrics. Let's just, I can't define what those are, but you know, they got to be out there.
But let's be clear about something. If we are rejecting certain items here because we don't want to rely on the triennial review, then we're not saying there, we're saying, I'm not sure if we're saying we're in compliance or not, except for the items noted. I mean, the items noted, we've had this discussion before, is noted by us, the board, not necessarily the staff. So if we are directing the staff to come up with better metrics, saying that we don't know if he's in compliance or not because we don't want to rely on this particular data as fair interpretation. So are you, I mean, it's not clear to me now if we're saying he's in compliance when we just throw out the data itself, or we say it's not reliable or not compelling, or if we're saying it's an item noted that we just need better things on, and then we'll decide later if he's in compliance or not once we get a better metric or metrics.
I think this gets to the insufficiency of our options, which we were at one point talking about dealing with, and then we didn't. In that, like, we're with option B, where we can either choose in compliance or not in compliance. There's no options like to specify, well, these are in compliance and we cannot determine whether these others are in compliance. That's not an option I have to vote on. I can vote that the entire
it's either
report
B
can
or
be,
it's E. It's either B or it's E. E is
right,
cannot be
but
determined.
you're talking about one term to apply to the entire report. So yes, I could vote E, and now we are throwing the baby out with the bathwater because of because a few sub policies we cannot determine whether or not they are in compliance. We have to vote E on the entire report, and I don't think that's what we want to do. And maybe we do. I guess I'm not going to speak for anybody. That's what I would like to vote on. Is what I would like to be able to say is that B is in compliance, except for these which I think are not in compliance, and these which I think I can't determine. But that's not an option presented to us. So if you're forcing us into an A, B, C, D, or E situation, then I would choose B, because that's the closest we come to that kind of parsing of the report.
And I thought the motion was B with follow-up in 2 months on the items noted. Am I misinterpreting? I thought that was.
Well, that is it. I mean, we expanded the original list of, except for items noted, per Jesse's amendment to Roger's motion. That's what we just voted on. But my point is, I think Jesse just kind of reiterated it and hit it, which is some of them were just saying, hey, it's not that, we think you're not in compliance. We agree with your interpretation, but we don't agree that you're in compliance with it, versus some which were saying the data's not any good. The data's not any good. We can't determine whether or not you're in compliance or not because we don't like the metrics we were given. Right. So I mean, it is a bit of a parsing of it. And I just want to make sure that we are clear that we're not making a determination with some of these where we're relying on the triennial review for support, that it's really cannot be determined, more so than it is you're not in compliance because we just don't think you hit it what you said you did. But right, I mean, Jesse's right. We don't have the option of saying, G, which is in compliance, some accept items noted and some can't be determined. So the best we can do is, I think, which we are doing, which is come back in 2 months with some of these. But we still have to do the vote on what's on the floor now, which is Roger's motion amended by Jesse. And so that amendment was made. So now we have a vote for that, unless there's more discussion on the motion on the floor.
Could somebody please restate what the motion is on the floor? We've had so much discussion, I have to say, I'm a little confused, or maybe more than a little confused.
We're saying level B, except for the items noted, and those items are 211, 213, 2131, and then by Jesse's amendment, I think 215 and 2151. Or just 215.
I didn't deal with the sub policies. I said 212 and 215.
212 and 215, sorry. Which, to me, it seems that we're more in reasonable progress territory in C, but not B, but B is on the table. Any more discussion? All right, so we have B, except for those items noted, as we stated, 211, 212, 213, and 2131, and 215. So we'll take a vote on that. At level B, Mike, to accept?
I'm still somewhat confused. I believe in B, but I don't think I want to include all those detailed exceptions. So if that's the way it's on the table, I'm going to vote no.
Rich? Rich?
Sorry, my phone was not unmuting. Is this the vote or is this to go with the B with the exceptions?
This is for the full motion, which is B with all the exceptions, 211, 212, 213, 2131, and 215.
I think I voted yes last time and I'm sticking with my yes.
Okay. Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Susan?
Oops. Sorry, yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm a no. So that passes 7-2. And then the staff will come back for the items noted by the, I guess, February meeting with an update for us about compliance. Okay, we'll close that out and then go to 3.2, which is monitoring reforms. That's continuation from what we've had before, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay. Let me find my notes here, sorry. But my overall point is really, I started this whole discussion about simplifying. We seem to be going in the opposite direction. My whole point, my objective, and what was behind it is I think the board and the staff is spending too much time on these monitoring reports. And therefore, my whole comment and the way I started all this discussion was about simplifying, and we're going in the opposite direction. It's not my point. My objective was not to do a complete broad reform of monitoring, but we seem to be going in that direction. And that's really why I voted no. We're going in the opposite direction. My point was, and I still feel strongly that we should be simplifying and spending less time on this. And we proved today, it's almost 8 o'clock, and I presume we spent more than an hour on this one, and just on a few details within this big report, which overall was very positive, and there were some exceptions to it. Yes, I think we're getting too much into the weeds. That's my personal opinion. And what I would have suggested is that we instruct Matt that a year from now to come back with some better, with some what he would consider to be improved interpretations, improved metrics, but that's not what we did. So, but I'm going to address just my reason I'm on the agenda, which was not a complete reform of the monitoring process. It was simplifying and making it less timely. And so what I was going to say and what I'm still going to say is we put out several potential suggestions of what we might do. We've gotten comments from people on that. And the next step for me, and I hope a task force that other people will be joining, is we scheduled a meeting with Rose Mercier to get her views on this. And I think it's for the 3rd of 4th, 5th of January. I think it's the first week in January at some time. It's already scheduled. And I was going to propose or request that other people join us. I already know that Rose does not agree with one of the suggestions, and that is to put monitoring reports on the consent agenda. She thinks that's very wrong, and we'll hear more from her at that time when we meet with her. But basically, that's all I have to report on a much narrower definition, not monitoring reform, monitoring simplification and streamlining to spend less time on staff and board.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is it's not reform so much as it is a reform of the monitoring schedule, which is, there are some things we can defer, some things that don't need to be every year, some things that take an inordinate amount of time. That's in your packet on page 36 and 37. You can see what Mike referred to there in the policies that he had in paragraph 3, rewording or deleting the humanity, collaboration, 292, 293, 291, and 2211. And then some of the housekeeping, we can just change, make sure that biannual and biennial mean twice a year or every 2 years, et cetera. And then delete the due column in Appendix A. Discussion on Mike's suggestion and the modifications to the monitoring schedule there. And then you can see in section 2 and in Mike's report about changes to the monitoring schedule there. So I'd like to hear the board's comments about support for Mike's proposal.
Yeah, and actually those suggestions are just some brief suggestions that I guess primarily just a few of us came up with. And I would like to have a task force that considers there's other ideas that could make it less time consuming, not just these. That was my idea.
Okay.
And I sure would like to hear other people's opinions.
So opinions on proceeding with this, and then hopefully a couple of volunteers to work with Mike and Rose Mercier on the task force. Discussion, Kathleen?
So Mike, thank you for bringing this forward. I think that some of your suggestions are quite excellent, especially the one with restructuring how often we monitor certain reports, things like, I off the top of my head, I can't think of one right now, but there were several suggestions that you gave that we are not using some of our policies on a frequent basis, like we're not building anything right now. So why do we need to hear about that report? Because there's nothing to report. I think the task force is the most excellent suggestion. And I also agree with what you said that Rose said with regards to not having the monitoring reports under the consent agenda. And the reason why I feel that way is that the monitoring reports are the way that we do our job. We've handed over all the responsibilities of how the AATA functions over to the CEO, and how we monitor that is through our reports. And so I think by having them on the consent agenda discussion like we had tonight, which yes, it took an hour, but I think it was very valuable, the things that we discussed. And so I would be interested to see what the task force would come up with and those discussions with Rose. And I would also like to offer that I would like to participate in the task force as well.
Thank you. Kyra?
Thank you, Kathleen.
I was going to say that I do agree with the suggestions as far as the fares, the labor negotiations, and the construction policies doing as needed. I need to look at the prescriptive ones a little bit more, but I also very interested to hear what Rose says. But I think, looking ahead a little bit, like at the CEO report, we've heard a few times now the concern regarding staff burnout. So I think we have to really be mindful of what we prioritize, especially with an upcoming millage. So I think it's good that we address this now, but maybe it would be helpful for me as a board member to have a better idea of and getting more frank feedback, I think, from Matt and from the staff about their priorities and what they're seeing, how much time they're actually spending on the monitoring reports, and would that allow them to focus on things that we as the board consider to be more important. So I think maybe the task force plus governance committee and executive team working together to figure out what is the most important thing for us going forward as we hopefully come out of the pandemic one day and get back on track. Like, this seems to be, in my opinion, I agree with Mike, taking up too much time when we have bigger issues that are right in front of us.
And do I hear you volunteering for that task force as well?
You do not. I'm sorry. I don't have the capacity right now.
Susan?
Yeah, as the newbie, a question about the role of committee versus the full board. That some of these metrics seem best examined and then approved within committee, and then others might be board appropriate. So for instance, we have finance or we have service, and those metrics that speak to each of those could be a deep dive in committee and then allowed to be on a consent agenda at the board because someone else has done the work. Does everyone have to do a review of all of them? Instead, can the work be done at the committee level? I guess I don't know how we've done that before, and I throw that out about how this gets done, because I'm not sure that we all need to be as deeply diving in if we have committees. What has been the practice before that, before today?
I think generally that's how we've operated. There certainly have been some policies, many of them that belong in one committee or another, finance related or specifically service related, or something governance related that goes to the governance committee first in terms of a process matter. And certainly those committees do the deep dive into working with staff to say this is where getting it to a place where we want it. Then there are some policies that really don't belong in a committee and do belong at the full board level, like treatment of riders or treatment of staff that are more fulsome and need more board approval. I think my guess, I haven't spoken with Rose Mercier on it, and Mike has. My guess is Rose would say something like Kathleen just said, which is, you can't, it's good to look forward and be planning and everything else, but you're not going to know if the staff has hit, the goals you've set out for them, unless you go into a deep dive on the monitoring. And each board member should get the opportunity. Before you don't have a long history with the board, I know, Susan, but we've run into this issue in the past where it seemed like, committee members were saying, hey, I'd like some visibility into that issue, even though I'm on this committee and that's not really in our wheelhouse. We'd still like some discussion and visibility into that issue over there. And then there were some issues like fare structure, for instance, where both committees had a legitimate claim to, service and finance had a legitimate claim to having a really keen interest in that particular topic. So, we've done the best we can with it. But my guess is Rose would say, no, this is the work of the board, something along the lines Kathleen said. So we've done that, and I think that's how we've operated in the past. But it's what we've run into, like I said, is some committee members saying, yeah, please don't exclude me just because I'm on this committee or that committee.
By the way, I have not talked to Rose. She emailed me about that one item because she thought that we were going to be voting on all of those tonight. And I replied to her, we were not going to be voting on those tonight. So all I know is her view on that one item.
Yep. So I think we have Mike and Kathleen to work with Rose Please let me know if you want to be part of that task force. Raymond, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll volunteer as well, since I stirred things up
Great.
a little bit. I think I probably need to.
Thank you.
You can also let me down for that too, please.
And Rich. Thank you both. So Mike, I'll leave it to you to work out something, and Matt and Deborah to hopefully get with Rose and do some scheduling for the first task force meeting on that. It seems like that task force would report straight to the board as opposed to going through one committee to the other. So I think we'll look forward to an update at the next board level meeting. Any other comments, questions about the, go ahead, Mike.
And Kathleen and Rich and Raymond, I will find out the exact date and time of that meeting that's set up with Rose and let you know.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on then to section 4, strategy operational updates. And 4.1 is our long range plan input. I think Mr. Yang will walk us through this. So go ahead, Forrest.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I know, a quick summary of round 2 engagement results was shared, discussed at the committee meetings. So I'm not going to go through all the details, but I'm going to highlight a few key messages from the public engagement. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, good. All right, just quickly, as you know, we done the public engagement back in October, November. We did receive over 400 responses from the online survey. We were able to, present the scenarios to almost 300 people, and we had an interaction or spoke to over 400 people at in-person meetings, and also some emails response. And then quickly, this is based on what we heard from the community, not just the online survey. This is a quick summary of all what we heard. So there is certainly a desire for major service enhancement, and that could transform, how people travel around our community. Generally their willingness, and they recognize this is going to cost a lot more and through the millage, but generally there's a willingness to pay if they see the clear benefit. And also it's clear message for some key features. They're looking for a convenient, reliable, and dependable services. Mostly they highlight, high frequency network, off-peak service, and of course the bus rapid transit express concept are going to work. And then they desire for more direct connection between non-downtown destinations. There's also desire to do a regional connection. Of course, in doing all this service change, we need to consider a few things. Collaboration came out a lot, especially collaborate with municipalities in terms, bus rapid transit priorities, mixed use development, those type projects, and then work with U of M for service planning, service coordination. There's a big topic on the cost. Like I said, we did post the question, we told people how much it's going to cost for each scenario. So consider cost, particularly from East Sandy Township, concern about an increasing mail rate. There's also concern about physical constraint about the right-of-way we have when we implement the bus rapid transit project. So that's just a quick summary of what we heard. Before I show you a chart on each scenario, and just want to give you a quick reminder of what those scenarios are. The scenario one, basic status quo, we're not proposing any major service improvement. The tax rate is going to be the same like today. And in scenario two is a minor enhancement, try to keep up with population and employment growth. Certainly there's a need to increase the mill rate. And then scenario three, we call it a modest enhancement. As you can remember, there's a proposed bus rapid transit along Washington Avenue, and there's extensive high frequency network. When I say high frequency, it's more like 15 minutes or better. And then move to scenario four, which is a major enhancement. We did propose like 2 full BRT lines, east-west and north-south, and then with more high frequency corridors. And of course, it will require additional investment. So those are 4 scenarios. And we show those scenarios to public. And this is kind of this is only from the online survey. But based on what we heard through other venues, this is pretty consistent. As you can tell, in each category, this is by transit usage. The frequent transit users or people who never used transit service before. So in each category, people prefer scenario 4, which is a major enhancement. And then there's a big portion prefer scenario 3, and still was a lot of service improvement there. Very few people said 1 or 2. So this is a more, getting your feedback. I understand that we've been talking about those same questions at the committee meetings. I tried to push for additional feedback. I know probably a couple of board members missed those meetings. I would like to hear from you. And also, for other board members, you have additional feedback or input, please do. And if you don't have any today, that's fine, but you can always share with us through emails or phone call.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Forrest, anything from the board right now? Feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Forrest. Would you mind sending that chart to the board members so that we can have it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
By the way, this is a very quick summary from the public engagement. We're working on a more detailed what we heard report, and hopefully we can publish that early next week. And certainly I will share that with you as well as soon as it becomes available.
Anybody else?
I'll just want to express my support for, in terms of what to focus on for the next stage, the equity and environmental metrics. I think that's something that came up in several times in the meetings that I attended. So I don't have anything to add, but I think you're really on point with those three items. Getting into the finer details, another thing that came up in the meetings I attended was a better understanding of how it allowed for like what new areas within our service area would have expanded. Like, are we, there was kind of didn't seem to be an understanding of whether we were talking about adding routes. Are we just talking about adding buses on the existing routes? So those kinds of details, I think, would help with people. Would help explain to people what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Forrest. Oh, Matt, do you have a hand up?
Oh, yeah, it's just, I wanted to share a perspective, and I'm wondering, Forrest, could you put the table back up? Yes, thank you. So one of the things Forrest and I were talking today, and it sort of clicked for me, one way of thinking about this, the intangible benefits that are across the top row, which include some of the things Jesse just mentioned, equity among them. Because of the way we've structured these scenarios, as the investment grows, generally the benefits grow. And we haven't gotten to a point at the, trying to like slice and dice in terms of, specifically which one gets more. So we can't really compare the ends statements, for example, against each other. Because generally speaking, the more you invest, the better it gets for all of them. They all kind of go up or down together. Yes, there will probably be some variation, but we'll need to get to the detailed section before we can really see a lot of that. So with that in mind, sort of the ends policies are more advanced in the higher scenarios because the investment is greater, just to oversimplify that statement. So if that section of the ends are generally thought of in that way, what else in the end statements needs attention? And it really maybe just comes down to the at what cost question of the end statement. And so that really drives us to value for money and down to those questions in the lower half of the table. And something I'm going to be interested going forward is sort of what's the sweet spot in terms of a cost that we're willing to pay as a community to advance the goals and initiatives that we have. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I also don't think, based on the discussions I've been part of, that there's going to be a unanimous answer. I think some people are going to have a very high tolerance for expense because they want to see those benefits. And we've heard very clearly from some other stakeholders that taxes are not something they are interested in increasing right now. So for us, yeah, I think if we say the rising tide raises all ships on the various end statements, then maybe part of the thing to focus on here is really, as Forrest said, at what cost? What's the community willing to pay for? So that was simply a different way of saying the same thing I think we've said before, but it occurred to me earlier today and I wanted to share it.
Thank you, Susan.
A question for Forrest. We're looking at the millage for operations. Can you share with me or help me to understand the likelihood of success in getting $383 million for capital costs over the next 20 years? The recent change in presidency and the House and Congress suggested that there were changes in priority of where funding might be coming from. Do we have some sense of confidence that despite the vagaries of politics, that the capital costs will be there if in fact there's local voter support for the millage?
Thanks for the question, Susan. Certainly there are more opportunities today, but it's still a competitive process, right? We have to make a good business case for all those capital projects. Right now, I think we can only assume, no matter how much federal state are going to pay, we still need a local share. They normally would like the local match, right? So in that portion, even assume we can assume 50% or even higher portion of this capital investment will come from federal and state support, but there is still going to be a local tax, or we can find another way to support this project.
If I might, I would add that it's definitely a stretch goal. In terms of guarantees, Susan, there are none. As Forrest said, a lot of the capital funding that would come through competitive grants. and it's hard to know for sure. So we are in effect saying 25 years from now, this is kind of the overall goal. There will be several federal bills between now and then, several opportunities for earmarks. Lots of opportunities will come up. There will be changes of administration. There will be new priorities. And we don't know what all of them are. We certainly don't have distinct funding sources for all 383 million. It's definitely something that we will have to work on and strive for over the decades.
So again, just to help fill in my understanding, there's a long distance between where we are in our early planning and where we'll eventually be. But is there a connection between the two numbers, the operation money and the capital money? I'm assuming, for instance, if we expand our service, we're going to need to buy a lot of buses. So there's a lot of capital dollars there. If the millage is approved, but the capital dollars aren't available, how does that work? Does the millage include funds for capital if in fact the grants are not received? Or does the constraint on capital grants constrain what the operations may look like? I've just never been a part of something as ambitious as this, so I was just curious.
Right, that's a really good point. I think that this is kind of a next step of work to develop a financial plan, and of course, implementation of financial plan. So right now, we basically just want to give you some ideas how much this plan is going to cost, right, and compare each scenarios. But next step, once we have the draft recommendation in terms of the network design plus other components, we're going to come out a funding plan. So how much we make assumption from federal, state, and the local. In that stage, we may have to find a local source for this capital project. Certainly there is a strong connection between the operations and, just like you said, we need more buses to deliver this more services, right? And maybe we don't need a full BRT. We need a kind of a signal priority / QGen planes instead of a whole BRT to reduce capital costs. But the operating costs or number of buses certainly going to be required. And then including the garage expansion, terminal expansion, all this capital projects. So some more details will come later. Hopefully, I would say early February, you will see some numbers.
Any other questions for Forrest? Discussion? Okay. Thank you, Forrest.
Thank you.
We'll move on then to the FY 2021 Q4 service report. I think this will be Brian taking us through that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report was in the packet. Just a few highlights that I would like to share is that our fixed route ridership has come back considerably. It is still nowhere near pre-pandemic levels, but up over 100% from this time last year, at least. And if anyone is looking for the hard numbers that are associated with that, you can find them in the table at the end. We did have some discussion at the service committee about updating the format of this report to include those directly. One item I did want to bring your attention to in terms of satisfaction and reliability is that we have had an increase in complaints over our TheRide paratransit service. We are monitoring that. However, I attribute most of them to the handover of service to our contractor, MV Transit. There were several days in the very beginning where trips were either missed or seriously late. Each of those days included very close oversight on our part by our staff, and the problems that were recognized each day were remedied immediately and corrected completely within the first 2 weeks. And the number of complaints have reduced since that time. And many of the transition issues were successfully resolved. The other point I would bring to your attention is the increase in FlexRide, both east and west. And in particular, the east service, which we attribute primarily to expanding the service during the pandemic to go directly to the YTC so that connections could be made directly to another bus at our transfer center instead of requiring a passenger to get on the 45 or 46, go into the YTC and then transfer to a bus to get it across town, for example. And with that, I would be happy to answer any other questions that the board had. With one final note that I'd like to thank Kelly Reynolds for putting the report together. We had a lot of challenges with the cyber attack, and she was instrumental in working with Mike Blackston and all of our team members to get the information. So thank you to IT support and the rest of the staff for helping Kelly get all of this put together.
Thank you, Kelly. Any other questions for Brian? Kathleen?
Just for informational purposes. So if someone takes FlexRide into the Ypsilanti Transit Center, they pay a fee to use FlexRide, then they're given a transfer to be able to take the bus, or are they paying twice, once for FlexRide and once for the bus?
They have a free transfer to and from. So if they call for FlexRide at the YTC, they can give their transfer and get a free FlexRide, and the reverse is true. The FlexRide operator will issue them a transfer for them to use on the bus.
Jesse, go ahead.
Can you refresh my memory? I think can we expect the next report to have TheRide information? I think I want to say we talked about that at the service committee meeting, but memory's a little hazy now.
I believe we would be able to have TheRide information on the next one. It will have run for a quarter by that point, I believe.
All right. I think we said that it wasn't on this one because TheRide wasn't running for a long time. But anyhow, okay. The other thing I had, I recall during the last financial report, we had lower than projected revenues from fares. Now you were just reporting that we were seeing a pretty good increase in ridership here. Is this ridership in line with our projections? Like, should we expect a little better outlook on that one particular line of the financial report, or is this keeping in line? Is this better? Is this worse than what we're anticipating for ridership?
To be honest, I wouldn't know the answer off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to get that for you and get back to you.
Anybody else? Roger, go ahead.
I just first like to compliment the staff on getting this report together in the middle of a cyber attack. I'm sure that took a lot of effort, and it was appreciated. And as far as projection, Brian, if you've got a way to do it, let me know what you're using, because these days it's impossible to know what the next month, next year is going to look like. So good luck.
Thank you. I'll be honest. I'm sure that Dina does have a projection in the budget. I just don't know what it is off the top of my head, and I didn't want to put her on the spot. So I'm certain there is one, and what I don't know is how this tracks with that. So I would want to get that all for you instead of guessing on the fly. But yes, I'm sure we did our very, very level best to figure out what that might be.
No, definitely. I don't expect you to be able to predict. I was more just looking at seeing how projections are matching with reality as it emerges, to see if that tells us anything.
Absolutely, and we can absolutely get that information for you.
Brian and Kelly, I would likewise like to compliment you on this report. It far exceeded what I was expecting because of the pandemic and the ups and downs in ridership and the ups primarily in terms of expenses and the effect that the per rider and per boarding statistics are very much affected by lots of stuff. It was, and then of course there was the cyber attack. I think it's a remarkably good document, particularly given the conditions that you had to endure to do this. And in terms of comparing the different periods, that's a very difficult thing because of all the changes. But I think you did as good a job as could be done regarding that. So thank you.
Thank you. And I will say without any shame that was Kelly's idea, and I thank her for it.
Anybody else? Comments, questions? All right. Move on to 4.3, the CEO report. I'll turn it back to Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start with some good news, and I want to ask Dina if she'd be willing to just very briefly give us an update on the restoration of real-time information and recent discussions with the feds about our triennial.
Sure, thanks, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity to share the updates since we issued the initial CEO report. So if you didn't happen to see today, we do have real-time information data available for our customers. We're very excited. I just want to really share with you that this was an extremely joint effort across the organization. This is a big win for IT, but it's really for the customers. And it wouldn't have been possible without the help of almost every department that we have contributing in some way. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that operations, communications, IT, finance, everybody had a role. So thanks to all the staff for their tireless efforts, as this has been a primary goal since day one. So we've just followed through on that. In other good news, we were notified about just over a week ago that our triennial review required documentation would be due on January 21st. That, as you might recognize, would be a big challenge for us given the state of our IT network right now, as well as other priorities on our plate that you are all very familiar with. We reached out to the FTA and really just explained where we're at and some of the challenges that we're facing. And we're fortunate and thankful to them for agreeing to give us an extension. We requested an extension from January 21st to March 25th. And given the extenuating circumstances that we laid out, which was again a compilation of effort by the team and the management team sharing information with me so I could be clear and articulate to the FTA about our challenges. And they agreed to not only extend the deadline for the RIR to the requested March 25th date, but also committed to allow us to complete our on-site virtual triennial review process later in the fiscal year. So we will still have even a little bit more time before they're really completing the triennial review. And although we want to complete it as soon as possible, we do really appreciate their graciousness in that, because it's our goal to put our best foot forward. And our concerns were that we might not really be able to do that given the circumstances. So a couple of good things today.
Yes, it was definitely good news, and our thanks to Lisa Joyner at the FTA for her help in that. That takes a big load off of staff, which brings me back to my regular CEO report. I do have some concerns, as I've noted in here, about workload on staff. Brian has shown me charts about the amount of overtime drivers are pulling. I'm very cognizant of the work that's being done by the administrative staff. And there is no escaping the depressingly more frequent notifications from our HR department about staff COVID infections. Up to about a month ago, TheRide had really kind of weathered COVID remarkably well. Although the floodwaters got high on a couple of occasions, it never really got to the core of our operations and hit us in a way that affected our ability to project service. But as you heard from Brian earlier, that moment has finally come with the fourth wave and Delta. Our screening systems are still holding up. People are still wearing masks. None of that changed. I think what we're seeing is just the sheer volume and velocity of Delta in Michigan is so great that no barrier we could erect could really keep it at bay. So we are continuing all our efforts on that front, but it is certainly having an effect. So rather than burn people out, we've made the difficult decision to sort of pull in our horns a little bit and stay with what we can do. So that we can come roaring back stronger as soon as we can. A couple other things to note here. On the second page, the board of the Regional Transit Authority met earlier today. I was a little surprised. They made two decisions. One, they did approve their long-range plan, which we've had a fair amount of input into, and we can discuss later at length. The second was, this was what I was not expecting. They made an explicit decision that they will not be going to the voters in November of 2022. Will not. So that I did not expect that, and I'm still thinking that maybe I don't know if they'll change their mind, but it was an unexpected decision. Certainly affects some of our decisions going forward. So other than that, my compliments to staff throughout the organization, just under increasingly bizarre and difficult conditions, they really do bring forward great results. So I'm very proud of them. They're doing a wonderful job. With that, Mr. Chair, happy to answer any questions you may have. And I do have, if we have just a moment, one other update on preparations for your return to in-person meetings, if we have a few moments.
Any question on the CEO report? Mike, go ahead.
Matt, I'm not surprised, and I take very seriously your statement in there about the staff burnout in these extraordinary times. And I sure hope the board can be cognizant of that and try to do all it can in terms of trying to take the pressure and the workload off, and things can be postponed, and any other things that we can do to support you. And I'm somewhat disturbed that tonight it looks like we put some more pressure on you with a requirement to come back in 2 months, but that's the way it happened.
Any other questions about the CEO report? Go ahead, Matt, update us about the in-person meeting. I think Matt's referring to the fact that we will be starting to gather together in person next month at the library. I'm sure Matt's going to take us through the details right now.
Sure. Let me ask, first of all, can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So yes, as Eric mentioned, the Open Meetings Act in the state of Michigan will be requiring a return for boards such as this one to in-person meetings in January. Various bodies throughout the county are getting ready for it. As I hear in my various meetings, everyone's sort of getting ready. We have a couple of board policies that are relevant here. As you can see, things we're taking into consideration, and really the risks that are coming up are things I'm sure maybe on your minds. And I have some photos and some information here today to try to just sort of ease you into this, let you know what it looks like at this stage. It's still a fluid and evolving situation, but I do think we have a plan going forward. So minimizing the risk of all the people who are there in person, and that really is coming down to heavy leveraging of technology and doing as much social distancing as we can within the space available. And that's a bit of an interesting point. So as I said, more technology, but one of the interesting things that's coming up is that I think, we know how to do an in-person board meeting really well. We've learned how to do a virtual board meeting really well. Now we've got to try to do both of them simultaneously. It's becoming clear that these hybrid meetings, we haven't as a society yet completely figured out the standard way of doing it. So we're going to learn into this one over the next year, I'm sure, with everyone else about exactly the best practice and the best way to pull these things off. There will be changes, and we will look forward to your feedback as we go along. And this was a surprise to me. The Ann Arbor District Library, which is where we have traditionally held our meetings, has been extremely gracious, and we want to thank them for allowing us and you to resume meeting in our traditional meeting space on the 4th floor of the downtown Ann Arbor Library, as we have done for many years. This is an exception. The library is not allowing any other gathering or any other group in the library. So we really do thank them for this exception. One of the other things we should thank them for is they've been very busy over there and have made heavy renovations to that room. I did not recognize it when I walked in. I took some pictures, and I'd like to share them with you now so you get a sense of the space that you're going to be moving into coming soon. So let me try to orient you. If you may recall, we used to have two sort of crescent shaped tables facing each other. And they were, if you walked into the room, you kind of walked in behind the chairman, if you will, from the rear. If you look at the room on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the window. That is the window in the rear of the room. They have turned the whole room 90 degrees, or at least the orientation of it, about 90 degrees counterclockwise. So it now points east, if you will, and they've changed the orientation so that there are a standard crescent moon shaped dais, one set of tables arranged like a city council with a podium in the middle. If you can see my cursor, can you guys see my cursor? I just want to, yeah, okay. So here's a podium in the middle. These are the tables. There's a heavy amount of technology in this room that was not there before. There are at least 3 view screens for you and the audience. The first one is right here in front of the podium. On this slide, which is just the same room from the other side, you can see that screen here. There are also large screens behind the board members on either end. They are very visible to someone sitting in this corner, can easily see that one, and vice versa. So you will all have easy viewing of PowerPoints and slides that are put up. You'll note a lot of audience chairs in here. We're probably going to have fewer chairs, and they will be spaced out a bit more. The other thing to note here in the back of this side is an entire AV booth. This is like a television projection booth. This was not there before at all. So there's a lot of AV material. You can't see them very well, but there are cameras all over this room, including some standing on tripods. We'll see one in a moment, to allow all of these things to be broadcast, which is wonderful. Here's some more pictures from other angles. Please ignore the curtain. The red curtain is on a stage, and we will move that when you get in there. Again, you can see all the seating in the audience. We will probably have fewer seats and more distantly spaced. The speaker's podium in the middle, the tripod camera that will be able to focus on anyone on the dais who is speaking. You can see some of our staff there in the background for perspective. And this slide really brings us, I think, to what I perceive to be one of the chief issues. These are the same 6-foot-long picnic tables, if you will, that we were using before. And even if we can get a little more space between the tables, which we think we can, than what's shown in this picture, very likely you and I will be sitting two to a table within a few feet of each other. We are going to be exploring the potential for plexiglass dividers to see if that's something we can add to supplement this. You can see Mary and Scott there. Scott is our workplace safety officer who is part of this walkthrough. This we recognize as possibly a point of discomfort for some of us who will be sitting at this table. It does raise questions about masking. The library will require us to have masks in the building. We're, as volunteers, it will be up to you to decide as a body what you want to do about vaccine disclosures and other things like that for yourself. And we're going to attempt to leverage technology to allow speakers to participate remotely if we can. We're going to try to do the hybrid meeting, like I said, where people can continue to participate by Zoom in real time so they don't have to come to the meeting to make public comment. But right now, I got to tell you, that's apparently a difficult trick to pull off. So hopefully that will be ready by January. If not, we may have a little bit of bump in the road to iron that out before February, but we will continue to work on it. So I just wanted to share all those pictures with you so you have a sense of the space that we will be moving back into. It is very nice and heavily renovated. There are more changes, but those are just the ones I thought you'd be most interested in.
Thanks, Matt. Questions or concerns about that right now? Mike?
Yeah, I think it's only fair for me to disclose to the entire board that I have a medical condition that seriously impairs my immune system. And part of that impairment is that even though I've had not two, but three Moderna vaccines and had a blood test after the third, actually after the second two, the vaccine has apparently given me no antibodies against COVID. And therefore, I really cannot attend board meetings in person. And I'm sorry, I'm not deserting AAATA. I will attend remotely, but my vote won't count. I won't be part of the calculation for quorum. So I just wanted everybody to know before you don't see me next month in person. That's why.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else? Okay, We'll close out the CEO.
Sorry, this is Rich. It took a while to get my mute thing. Is there any indication that there is discussion about maybe extending the open meetings waiver that they have right now, or is it firm that they said, nope, it's January and we're gonna have to be in person?
I've heard nothing to suggest the legislature is going to extend the allowance of virtual meetings. It has become very politicized, unfortunately, as many things are in this pandemic. And the legislature does, as far as I know, doesn't seem inclined to extend the virtual allowance.
Okay. Yeah, because it's a bummer not being able to have Mike be able to participate fully.
Yeah.
So I was just not sure if maybe there's a potential chance that that could change, but it sounds like that's a no.
Yeah.
But thanks.
Yeah, Rich, and I've talked to Senator Jeff Irwin about this. And he said even though there's a number of people, including him and others, that are trying to get the Open Meetings Act changed, there is a lot of resistance to do that. As Matt said, it's very politicized. If things get a lot worse, and they just might, they could reconsider, but that's right now, it doesn't look likely under the current situation.
Thanks.
Raymond?
With all this in mind, is this something we can take a policy statement on and forward it to our elected officials? I realize it may not move the needle, but this will inhibit. To me, this is a serious consideration and one that feels like we should at least make that point known. I know that it's not an action item on the agenda, so I don't think we can act on it, but it feels like saying something. I appreciate what Mike has been doing to, reach out to elected officials, but as a board, if we made a statement, I don't know if there's interest among others, but it feels pretty important if we're losing board members over it.
I would support that. I think that's a great idea.
I'll tell you what, Raymond, why don't you go ahead and draft one up, and the rest of us will take a look at it and see where it is.
Okay.
Kathleen?
So Chairman Mahler and I had a discussion earlier this month with regards to returning back to open meetings. And in our conversation, I had inquired and he had raised, what are there going to be the cleaning protocols before we enter the meeting? And also, Chairman Mahler was concerned, and rightfully so, I am as well, about the mics and particularly the speaking area that we're speaking into, the phone pieces. Will CTN be taking precautions that way as well? Because we don't know who has used that equipment before us. You know what I'm saying? So even though all of us may feel safe or we may have those dividing boards or whatnot, equipment is a priority as well, to me.
That is an excellent question. I will get back to them and ask what their cleaning protocols are. I do know that the only other group using the room and the equipment right now is the library board itself. I don't know when they're meeting, but I would imagine the mics are only being used by that group and obviously handled by the staff. So I will get back with you about the answer to that question.
As someone who works in AV for the University of Michigan, this is a topic that we talked about a lot because most of our classrooms have actually exponentially more classrooms have microphones now because of the hybrid systems. And the research that we came up with, while it is possible for someone to expel COVID onto a microphone, there's practically no way for the microphone to expel COVID back at the person. So it was not, we don't clean the microphones and we haven't experienced any sort of transmission. There were a lot of conversations about that. I don't know if that helps put your mind at ease, but if you think about the transmission of COVID being the expelling of the virus, the microphone doesn't do that. So there's really no chance, or very I guess I'm not a medical expert, so I won't say no chance, but it was determined by our health and safety experts at the University of Michigan that cleaning the microphones was not necessary. And we have not had any indications or notifications of transmission in the classroom associated with microphones, or at all, as far as I've been made aware.
Thank you, Jess.
Hey, Raymond, you can, I can help you out with that letter, by the way, too, if you want.
Okay, thanks, Rich.
Any other discussion on the CEO report or return to in-person meetings? Okay. We'll close section 4, go to section 5, emergent items. Any emergent items from anybody? One I'll bring up, it's not on the agenda, it's not really an emergent item, but the audit task force did meet a couple of weeks ago. And I think UHY is beginning to work with Dina and her team to put with Latasha to put together this year's audit plan and report. So more to come in the spring, but that is underway. I just want people to know. Any other emergent items? If not, we'll go to section 6, closing items. You have the topics for the next meeting there. Board's end disclosure statements are due next meeting. Any other topics anybody wants to bring to the board's attention for next month?
Well, maybe, I don't know if this is worth discussion, but I mean, staffing to me seems like a really big issue or challenge. And I don't see it actually really getting it there with Omicron. And so part of my concern is actually not only just drivers, but also operationally, Brian's team of folks that have to deal with maintenance on the buses. I know we're already short-staffed before, especially finding the licensed, skilled people to work on the different vehicles that we have. Is it worthwhile to discuss partnerships with other organizations in the community that maybe have that skilled workforce? And I'm not saying it's a permanent fix, but maybe it's something worth exploring of we're all kind of in the same boats, and maybe we have to combine resources for the next year or so just to make sure that we're all able to keep our gear in tip-top shape, right? Because I don't want to have, and this is going on the deep end, like an issue where, like down in Florida, where they had maintenance fell behind, and then you have resulting issues, right? And I think that's, like I said, that's a severe case, but I'd rather we be safe and combine resources to make sure that riders and staff are all safe. So I don't know if that's something worthwhile considering or discussing.
I mean, the staffing is, I mean, we've pretty much deferred that, but the staffing to the staff, but I can let Matt respond to that, or perhaps he can take it under consideration for.
I think what Rich was getting at is discussions of staffing solutions and recruitment processes.
Right.
Is that roughly correct, Rich?
Yeah, that's part of it. And also just, I guess to be more clear, like University of Michigan, I think they have similar buses and stuff. And so I don't know if they're also having challenges with shortages in maintenance staff. And is there a way that all of us can work together to make sure that we're combining resources, right? So if they have 10 mechanics, we have 10 mechanics. In reality, all of us need like 20. Then combined, we get 20 mechanics.
I'm happy to take it under consideration. If you guys would like to make it a board education item in terms of the business of the authority, I think that would be a way to compel me to discuss it. To be perfectly frank, I don't want to ask my staff to prepare reports for you about how we do recruitment. They've got a lot on their plate, and I don't, if you guys have suggestions, by all means, send it. but they're already doing most of the things you would expect. We have a great working relationship with the University of Michigan's fleet department. Rich, you're absolutely right. They do use a lot of the same types of buses. Their mechanics are just as busy as ours. If there's an opportunity for sharing, I think we would have already found it. So I don't mean to put it off. It's just the idea of discussing that kind of a means at a board meeting is very meansy, and I would want staff to be prepared to explain to you how we do this, and that would require a lot of effort from them to prepare for that meeting. If you guys want us to go down that road, we can. I would respectfully request maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely didn't want it to be a lot of work. It was just more if there was like a 30-second or minute discussion of like, yeah, that seems possible, or it's not. And that's, I think I got the answer of, it's probably not a good idea to do that. So I'm A-okay with that.
Thank you.
Other discussion on emerging items? All right, we'll close that, or closing item, sorry. If not, we'll go to 6.2, public comment. Deborah, do we have anybody from the public who wants to speak to the board? If you are phoning in, please use *9. If you are Zooming in, please use the raise hand icon.
Yes, Mr. Pawlowski will be the first one up. You are unmuted.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everyone again. First thing I'd like to start off with is I'm glad to see the meetings in person after a couple of years. So credits to the library and Matt and everyone at TheRide to getting that straightened out. And I hope to see everyone in person next month. Because this is the last meeting of the year, I just like to say thank you to everyone at TheRide, including you, Matt, for what you have done this year. You have accomplished so much, from going to restoring service to long-range plans to the new budget. And just seeing this board change over the course of this year has just, it's incredible. And how far we've come over this year, it's amazing from everything. I know we're downsizing on 4 routes and going back into somewhat pandemic service with Route 4 and Route 24 and taking out a couple of the U of M routes to the transit center on the campus. But it's something small, but we've come so far. It's amazing. So thank you to everything that you've done and all the work you've put in this year. And I anticipate going into next year, it'll be a lot better than this year. So thanks again and keep up the good work. As for the update about the service, I know we don't have a lot of drivers, but the way, like I mentioned this before, tons of promoting. Now this one's for Brian and Matt. Are you hiring anybody at the moment to do sign spinning or anything that I can help out to get something going to get more people in the door? I have a big background with promoting. I do a lot of promoting in my area for certain companies. So anything I can do to help out, I'm up for the challenge, because I hate to see y'all in this state right now where we're trying to scrape up people to get in the door. And Smart, I'm sorry to say it, but Smart is beating you in numbers, and it's crazy. And for a wonderful system like this, we shouldn't be suffering. Even when we just had a service restoration, you are still having problem getting people in the door. So anything you need help wise, just email me anytime. I'm more than welcome to promote anything you have going on. But as far as anything else, the millage, like I said, I will definitely, vote yes on the millage for 2022. It is critical for this, for how much progress has been going into the system. And I really do think we need, full support from even non-transit riders on this millage. Like I said, during the first public comment period, I will be definitely promoting this millage by going on various street corners. And I'll be doing the same thing with the Smart millage. I will be holding up signs and definitely trying to get people's opinion on it. We need people's opinion. We definitely need more public support on this millage. And that's what I'm going to do going forward into summer of 2022. So if anyone sees me, make sure you honk to support our millage 2022. I'm doing this for the ride, and I'm doing this to keep our system on the road. But vote yes 2022 for our millage. But as always, have a great holiday, and thank you for the time and opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Deborah, do we have anybody else?
Yes, Mr. Mogensen, you are unmuted, sir.
So as it relates to the challenge with the Opens Meetings Act, this is going to be a real challenge, particularly for riders who have reasons to be concerned to coming to meetings. However, as a person in the faith communities have found ways to make this work. I have participated in them, and particularly with the amount of technology that you have in the library board room, it should work okay. I have been in meetings where there have been both live and hybrid people participating in meetings together. So it can be done, and it works, and particularly with the large TVs and the amount of technical support that's there, you should be okay with all of those restrictions. So I just wanted to give that heads up. We're all at least I am, of course, along with everyone else, concerned about this latest surge, and it's unfortunate that there can't be an extension because it would make the most practical sense, but it looks like that won't happen. As it relates to the policy governance and the monitoring reports, my sense of things as a person who's been observing is that right now you started policy governance, and then you were developing the reports. And my sense was that after you threshed through a lot of these reports, you would eventually stabilize the reports, find little glitches where they could have been fixed, and they would have been more standardized, and there would have to be less conversation after a while. That, of course, got derailed by the pandemic. So that, and it makes it more difficult to have the metrics make sense. We all kind of understand, but there have to be these asterisks. And I do think that with changes in the workforce, Roger was saying, people don't want to work. I think everybody reset. We all know this, right? Everybody reset. And one of the struggles is that people made life changes and everybody did it all at once. And that's not normally the way it works. And so those things are probably not going to change quickly. Remember that at the very beginning of the pandemic, the motor coach operators in Detroit were dying. And if you were to decide on what you were going to do, that would be a consideration, exposure consideration of people that you don't know. And right, so it's not a surprise to me that that's happening, and the same thing in the restaurant field and some other things. So that makes sense, and it's also going to impact ridership on the ride, because if we do more remote stuff at the university, if that continues happening, that's going to impact some of that. I will say about the triennial review, that's the folks from FDA are coming in. It's on site. It's very stressful because you want all the reports to be there, but it's sort of basically they're flying in saying, okay, show us your reports. And I looked at Houston. Houston had a triennial report and they had some problems. And they said, hey, you didn't have the board do your Title VI review. And the people at Houston were able to show, yeah, they had done that. Now, the Title VI review for their revamp in 2015 was 10 pages long. But because it went through the board, they passed, because they did have one. So I'm just letting you know that that's the main thing, is to check off those boxes and to have that there. And it's helpful both from a ridership, from a understanding what's happening with the routes, and that to have a place where it's easily accessible, to have that an archive of that information. So if there's a way on the website to have an archive of the routes the way they used to be and the routes the way they are now, and the same thing with some of this other stuff, it would be helpful. I have a large library of ride guides, so I could go way back because I saved them, right, on purpose. but that in the electronic age, that becomes more and more of a challenge. So as always, thank you very much. I thank all the board members for being part of the board, and of course, all the staff people for all the work in making this happen. It's been a very difficult time and is in the process of continuing. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Deborah, do we have anybody else who wants to address the board?
Nope, that was it.
Okay, we'll close the public comment. 6.3, there's a closed session proposed on our agenda. And would somebody like to make a motion for us to go into closed session?
So moved.
Kyra?
Rich.
I make a motion to go into closed session for strategy connected with negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement pursuant to Section 8C of the Open Meetings Act, and to receive legal advice pursuant to Section 8H.
Have support?
Support.
Support from Roger. Let's go on to the vote then. Mike?
Yes, did you hear me?
Yes. Rich?
Yes.
Excuse me, Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also yes. So I think the link for the closed session was sent out earlier today. Please use that. And we will see you in the closed session. Thank you.